Yo, what's good? Yeah. So basically, it's gonna be cut in like 5 minutes and shit. I don't know why I started off with that. Hello, everybody. This is the third episode of the Chronicles of Degeneracy. Yeah. So, I recorded like the second part like a few weeks ago, and now I'm redoing the first part because it didn't save, so. Yeah. So, yeah. If you don't like that, eat shit. But, if you do like it, I love you. Thank you. Very good fucked up passion project we have here going. Alright, let's get started, alright? Remember, David is like supposedly in hell and shit, so, yeah.
Whole lot. David is in the deepest, darkest reaches of hell, being endlessly tormented. He previously went on an infernal murder mission to kill 1,000 evil people on Earth so that his love could live again. It ended with his death, but she was brought back from the dead with no recollection of him. Now prepare yourself for the infection, the scourge of humanity, the wave of filth washing over Earth. Prepare yourself for Evisceration play. David has taken his rightful place. He kneels not only before Satan, no rules of man binding him. All that now exists to him is torture. Breathing in the burning, sulfuric air, David has found his place of eternal damnation. The scent of burning hair and flesh pierces his lungs as his body is penetrated by steel. Spikes enter his rib cage and he is caught between forces of death. But he cannot die. No, he is doomed to forever withstand unimaginable pain and affliction. And he will never let up. He lies in the ashes of the mutilated bodies of sinners before him. They now reside elsewhere in hell. David is flayed alive, his bloody entrails becoming disconnected and seeping in entangled piles onto the brimstone ground. Demons fly above him, feasting upon the mangled souls of sinners as they wail in despair and agony. Bones drop from black clouds and with sharply broken edges implant themselves into the punished bodies of the damned. David is thrust into a pit filled with other souls in punishment. Their numerous mortal wounds bleed profusely and blood begins to pool around their feet. Demons swoop down and claw at their face and neck to cause more bleeding. The blood begins to rise even faster, now enveloping the sinner's knees. The more blood there is, the faster it rises as demons continue cutting open and maiming the entrapped souls. The blood reaches their necks and several begin to go under. David himself is soon consumed by the sea of blood, and as it fills his lungs and nose, he can tell that it is not only blood. A considerable amount of vomit and piss floats about in this pool of blood. David, submerged in human fluids, struggles to hold his breath. Eventually he fails and drowns, packed like sardines in a can, inside a pit filled with blood. His soul returns to the surface of hell to be tortured more, his baptism in blood having ended. David endures this for years, being tortured and tormented constantly for the whole time. However, there were forces on earth attempting to change this. David had been buried in a small cemetery, one without a church due to the fact that David had burned it to the ground, and before his grave stood a specter.
Damn.
Black apparition draped in a tattered black cloak, the cloak wrapped around a being composed entirely of shadows. The only part of the specter that was not the darkest shade of black was its eyes. They burned brightly with the fires of pure hatred. The specter grimly stood before David's headstone, staring at the ground below. It raised an ethereal hand above his head and the air grew far colder. The wind in the cold December night grew harsher and fog began to roll in from a lake in the distance. In a harsh voice, one with a distinct inhuman quality to it, the specter declared to all the corpses littering the mortal plane, "Arise now and bathe this world in blood." The wind around the cemetery quickened to the point of being called a cyclone, and the moon began to darken. For a brief time, the world was left in total darkness, all stars having, for a second, lost their flame. As the light returned to Earth, the wind began to fade away, and with it, the grim specter. The night appeared to return to normal, but this was only for a brief time. These last seconds after the disappearance of the specter would be the last seconds of an Earth dominated by living humans. Yes, the last moments of an Earth in order before mayhem would reign. These moments drew to a close as a partially decayed began to claw its way out of the dirt. The first of the undead all across Earth to rise was David. He was drawn from hell and forced back into his corpse, and as he brought himself out of the ground, he noticed that he was not breathing. He checked his pulse and it was missing. David looked upon the earth he had twice left and stood in the center of a cemetery. He had been drawn from hell for a reason that he could tell, but he had no idea what it was. As he pondered the purpose for his third life, the ground began to break. More hands began to rise from the earth in various states of decomposition. Horrifying living cadavers dragged their broken bodies onto the world on the surface. As they closed around David, he knew that he should be feeling fear. But he wasn't. He wasn't afraid at all. The zombies crowded around him, but they didn't touch him. They simply stared at him with their vacant, dead eyes. As David stood, surrounded by a crowd of the reanimated dead, the specter returned. Now this scared David. He attempted to flee, but the zombies had formed a tight circle around him and wouldn't let him escape. The specter said to David, "Do not be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you. It was I who brought you back from the depths of hell. You have a purpose, David. You must lead these sinners. They followed you from the realm of damnation, and they are at your command." David looked at the decaying faces of his army of the damned and suddenly was washed over by an undeniable bloodlust. It seems as though every time he returns to earth, he is taken a hold of by an insatiable thirst for blood. And who was he to deny his infernal hunger? He accepted the task of the specter and gathered forces. The zombies waited until morning to make any moves. He wanted to leave the world one last night before the zombies of the damned ravaged their lives. He was aware of the fact that zombies had risen all over Earth. The specter had returned to inform him of this once they had all emerged from their tombs. The specter also put demons in charge of the living dead of other parts of the world so that David wasn't in direct control of all of them. As the sun rose over the last day of humanity's reign, David gave the command to all the demons and zombies to kill. Every person they can find must be slaughtered. The dead will join their forces. The forces of hell began to attack the living with ferocity and brutality. People were thrown to the ground and were feasted upon by decomposing corpses. Rotten teeth dug into the flesh of any human they could find, spreading the plague of death. The living attempted to fight back. They really gave it their all. But the forces of hell just wouldn't die. The bravest and the stupidest of humanity fought as brothers in arms, beating the living carcasses with bats and crowbars.
Jesus.
Some stabbed at them with knives. Some fired at them with handguns. It was all useless. The zombies rarely fell dead, and only the bullets seemed to have any effect at all.
Goddamn.
All of the people who stood against the living dead in their first onslaught were killed. Their lives were torn apart, and their bodies were devoured by the horrible ghouls that had risen from hell.
Shit.
Many people fled at the approach of the zombies. These people are the only people that would live to see the next day. As the sun set on the first day of David's reign, the majority of humanity had already fallen. The streets were lined with blood and entrails all over the world, and the dead bodies of the righteous were picked clean. The bodies of the evil were reanimated as zombies. As bones laid out across the city street.
I'm pause right there. Alright, so around the place where past me should pick up. So I will see you guys later. Fourth book coming out real soon. See y'all. Alright, we are back. I'm probably just gonna put a little bit of like probably gonna cut to black. It's gonna say like something happened. I'm probably gonna edit that in. But I don't know what happened. I'm just gonna go back to the top of the paragraph.
And the moon began to darken.
So,
for a brief
sorry
time,
about that, people.
The world was left in total darkness. All stars having, for a second, lost their flame. As the light returned to Earth, the wind began to fade away, and with it, the grim specter. The night appeared to return to normal, but this was only for a brief time. These last seconds after the disappearance of the specter would be the last seconds of an Earth dominated by living humans. Yes, the last moments of an Earth in order before mayhem would reign. These moments drew to a close as a partially decayed began to claw its way out of the dirt. The first of the undead all across Earth to rise was David. He was drawn from hell and forced back into his corpse. And as he brought himself out of the ground, he noticed that he was not breathing. He checked his pulse, and it was missing. David looked upon the earth he had twice left and stood in the center of a cemetery. He had been drawn from hell for a reason that he could tell, but he had no idea what it was. As he pondered the purpose for his third life, the ground began to break. More hands began to rise from the earth in various states of decomposition. Horrifying living cadavers dragged their broken bodies onto the world on the surface. As they closed around David, he knew that he should be feeling fear. But he wasn't. He wasn't afraid at all. The zombies crowded around him, but they didn't touch him. They simply stared at him with their vacant, dead eyes. As David stood, surrounded by a crowd of the reanimated dead, the specter returned. Now this scared David. He attempted to flee, but the zombies had formed a tight circle around him and wouldn't let him escape. The specter said to David, "Do not be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you. It was I who brought you back from the depths of hell. You have a purpose, David. You must lead these sinners. They followed you from the realm of damnation, and they are at your command." David looked at the decaying faces of his army of the damned and suddenly was washed over by an undeniable bloodlust. It seems as though every time he returns to earth, he is taken a hold of by an insatiable thirst for blood. And who was he to deny his infernal hunger? He accepted the task of the specter and gathered forces. The zombies waited until morning to make any moves. He wanted to leave the world one last night before the zombies of the dam ravaged their lives. He was aware of the fact that zombies had risen all over Earth. The Spectre had returned to inform him of this once they had all emerged from their tombs. The Spectre also put demons in charge of the living dead of other parts of the world so that David wasn't in direct control of all of them.
Dear God.
As the sun rose over the last day of humanity's reign, David gave the command to all the demons and zombies to kill. Every person they can find must be slaughtered. The dead will join their forces. The forces of hell began to attack the living with ferocity and brutality. People were thrown to the ground and were feasted upon by decomposing corpses. Rotten teeth dug into the flesh of any human they could find, spreading the plague of death. The living attempted to fight back. They really gave it their all. But the forces of hell just wouldn't die. The bravest and the stupidest of humanity fought as brothers in arms, beating the living carcasses with bats and crowbars. Some stabbed at them with knives. Some fired at them with handguns. It was all useless. The zombies rarely fell dead, and only the bullets seemed to have any effect at all. All of the people who stood against the living dead in their first onslaught were killed. Their lives were torn apart and their bodies were devoured by the horrible ghouls that had risen from hell. Many people fled at the approach of the zombies. These people are the only people that would live to see the next day. As the sun set on the first day of David's reign, the majority of humanity had already fallen. The streets were lined with blood and entrails all over the world, and the dead bodies of the righteous were picked clean. The bodies of the evil were reanimated as zombies. As bones laid out across the city streets, nobody wept, as nobody was left alive to mourn the dead. Those who had fled had left behind all they knew. They too died in a sense. As the people they became were far different from the people they were before the attack. Upon the eradication of the greater part of humanity, David gathered forces. He did this in Ankara, Turkey, so that he could have easy access to Europe, Asia, and Africa. He also established a division based in Nicaragua to maintain control over the Americas. The Oceanic region was overseen by one single demon, named Erinomos. Demonic representatives from all over Earth gathered in Ankara to confer with David. David handed out official land divisions to all the demons, giving them the responsibility to wipe out human populations in their specific area of land. However, David noticed that one demon was missing from the Ankara Conference of Satanic World Domination. His name was Norath, and he was to oversee Scandinavia. He rose out of Norway and quickly gained ambition of his own. He resented the power that David had over the undead satanic forces and wanted it for himself. He did not show up to the Ankara Conference and instead began to exert his control over Europe. He quickly wiped out all the remaining people he could find, and he took hold of Europe. He militarized all the zombies in Europe and made them his own subjects, leading a rebellion against David's order. By the time the Ankara Conference ended, Norath already had control over the entirety of Europe and northern Asia and Africa. When the demons returned to the territory that they were given, they found their forces and turned against them. Norath had all of them captured and brought to his dungeons in Italy. The entirety of Italy had turned into Norath's prison system, filled with block after block of horrible prison cells filled with torture devices. Norath imprisoned the demons and had them tortured until they finally died. Only a demon could kill another demon. So once they reached the point of complete weakness and helplessness, Norath would enter their cells and murder them with cold apathy and efficiency. Their bodies were molded in gold and put up as statues in Norath's infernal palace in Norway. Norath pushed farther into Asia and Africa, leaving death and destruction in his wake. David was none the wiser. As all the demons Norath encountered, he took prisoner. All the zombies Norath found, he turned against David, and all the humans Norath found, he either sent the undead armies after or swallowed them whole. As Norath's rule spread, he left two areas unconquered. The first was Ankara and all areas around it, as he didn't want to alert David of his taking of power. And the second was a large settlement in southern Africa. It was the one place on Earth where humans remained, a settlement called Old Villador. People from all across Earth fled to that specific place after it was communicated worldwide that all standing governments would come together there, and anybody was welcome to come. Of all the people to enter Old Villador, one of them was Pomni, the love of David's past two lives. She lived in the same city that David rose from his grave, and she didn't know why, but there was something that made her flee that night that the dead returned to the mortal plane. Something told her to run, and she did. Now, there used to be a new Villador. After the inhabitants of Old Villador sailed across the sea and settled a part of Brazil, the new Villador was crushed in its infancy by the satanic undead. The Americas and the Oceanic region were still entirely out of Norath's reach, and they still belonged to David. But other than Old Villador, Ankara, the Americas, and Australia, Norath owned the entire world. At this point, David was aware of Norath's power, but it was too late. David had lost so much land that he couldn't possibly stop Norath's forces. He decided that he had to flee. He knew that Norath was planning something, as demons and zombies that David had sent to scout the borders of David's domain had never returned. Narath was waiting on the edges of Ankara, likely planning an attack. David had forces from the Americas come to him to rescue him, but they arrived just too late. Just as they entered Ankara, Narath's forces invaded. David saw the carnage unfold. He watched his armies run against Narath's, and they were all cut down, as were Narath's forces. But Narath didn't care. He was completely apathetic to the death of his subjects. He marched them into certain death and watched as they were slain without batting an eye. David, somehow the lesser of two evils, couldn't bear to continue watching his men die, so he ordered them to retreat and instead sent demons at the armies of Narath. As Narath wasn't fighting himself, the demons began to mercilessly rip apart the zombies with speed and ferocity. 3 demons were able to destroy the majority of Narath's ranks, but then Narath entered the fight. He walked with something of a calm rage about him. He held in each hand a sword, forged from the bones of demons he had slaughtered, and he wore jet black armor. His face was as white as snow, but around his eyes and lips, his skin was charred and black, as his eyes glowed with the fires of hell, and flames licked the air with every breath he took. His hair fell around his shoulders, colored so black it appeared to steal light from objects around it. The first demon that charged him was quickly dispatched, with a stab right into the throat from both of Narath's swords. Narath then quickly jerked each sword in a different direction and decapitated the demon. The other 2 demons were smarter about their attack and ran at Narath together. As they advanced, Narath threw fire from his mouth and eyes at one, reducing him to ash. The other one looked very scared and stopped charging. He turned around and began running deeper into Ankara. This enraged Narath even more. The fact that this demon had started the fight and then ran away from it the moment it didn't go his way pushed Narath's fury even further. Giant black bat's wings folded out from Narath's back and he took flight. He flew over Ankara, breathing fire upon all the buildings he encountered and cutting apart all the zombies and demons he saw. Ankara was left very weak, as during the fight, David and the 4 demons he deemed the most elite had gotten into a boat and fled to the Americas. Narath single-handedly destroyed Ankara, leveling every building in the settlement and murdering every living thing he could find. He left the cowardly demon for last. He spread the plague of death across Ankara, killing everything around the cowardly demon, but letting him live. The demon thought he might escape. That's when Narath descended upon him. Narath promptly ripped both of the demon's arms from his sockets so that he could not fight back. Narath then burnt the demon's wings to a crisp so that he could not attempt an escape. Narath ran his claws along the demon's body, flaying him as he still lived. Narath slowly ripped the skin from his bleeding body, and as the demon screamed, Narath laughed. Narath then reached into the demon's chest and grabbed a hold of his ribs. Narath pushed with all of his strength until the ribs began to push backwards. Narath pushed them until they protruded from the demon's back. Narath found this especially funny, because the mutilated rib cage almost looked like wings, and Narath had destroyed the demon's wings. The ribs stayed showing through the demon's back as the demon howled and wailed with horror and agony for what he had just seen. The ribs dripped with blood and other unidentified fluids, and were flecked with small bits of flesh. The demon continued to shriek with pain and fear, and Narath decided he would put his fire to use once again. Narath projected fire from his eyes directly into the eyes of the demon, blinding him. As the demon was brutally abasinated, he gasped and choked as blood boiled in his throat and on the surface of his flesh. The demon was being boiled alive in his own blood. Narath decided to be merciful now and end the demon's life. He dug his claws into the demon's skull and pulled out his brain, causing a swift but painful execution. As Narath sat there on top of the demon's body, surrounded by the burning wreckage of Ankara, he feasted upon the brain and looked upon the carnage he had brought. Due to him, all humans in Europe and Asia had been exterminated. The vast majority of Africa had also been wiped of humanity, with Old Villador remaining as the last human settlement. Narath had attempted to break into its walls before, as had David's forces, but neither had been successful. Old Villador was simply too strong. Narath decided that he couldn't take Old Villador now. That would have to be his last battle. No, his next objective was to take Australia and its neighboring countries. He set sail for the oceanic region. He took fleets of zombies with him. He advanced into Australia himself, and he sent unarmed zombies to destroy the neighboring countries. He didn't attack Australia until the other countries fell. He flew above the oceanic countries and surveyed the damage. Not a single building stood standing, and not a single living thing remained. Instead of relying on his armies to take Australia, he advanced alone. He flew above the country and saw that there wasn't much left alive. The zombies had all been killed by the humans living there, and only a demon remained to prey upon them. Some people were even alive. Narath decided to first get rid of the demon. Narath fell from the sky onto the demon and stabbed both of his swords into the demon's back. Then he grabbed the demon at each temple and repeatedly jerked his head back until it simply snapped off. Then the humans began to emerge. Only about 50 remained living. They began shooting Norath and throwing things at him. Before he acted, Norath took flight again and surveyed the country. He found no other signs of life. He returned to where he started and raised the signal for the people to return. They attacked Norath and he simply burnt most of them to death. 7 remained. He cut 3 in half with one swing of his sword, and he beat 2 to a pulp with his fists. One of the remaining 2, he bit the head off of. The last living human in Australia was the least lucky of them all. Norath had special plans for him. Norath procured the demon head that he had earlier severed. The human cowered in fear as Norath walked ever closer. When Norath reached the terrified man, he ripped off his arms with ease. The man screamed and tried to run away, but Norath grabbed him and ripped off his legs too. Norath pushed the man to the ground as he bled onto the dirt. Norath removed the man's clothes and took out the severed head of the demon. He pressed the loose, dead lips of the head onto the man's cock as he screamed. The demon had razor-sharp teeth, and as Norath fucked the man with the severed head, he made sure to do so roughly so that the man's cock would be repeatedly deeply cut by the teeth. Eventually, Norath tired of this and quickly pulled the head down, severing the man's cock. He shrieked with horror unimaginable, and in his panic, he began to curl up, and his screams grew quieter. He drew a last rattling breath, and there he lay dead, the blood loss and shock having killed him. Norath consumed the man's corpse and left Australia, satisfied at having extinguished all human life there. Now, back to the matter of David, he had arrived safely in Nicaragua, all his forces having collected there. However, 2 demons got into a fight on the way over and killed each other. All those remaining loyal to David were gathered in Nicaragua, and David divided his remaining territory among them. There were already 2 demons over there, and now that David had brought 2 over, he had 4 to divide the land among. He stationed 1 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, to oversee the southern half of South America. He stationed 1 in Quito, Ecuador, to oversee the northern part of South America.
I'm hungry anymore.
He stationed 1 in Monterrey, Mexico, to oversee the southern half of North America, and he stationed 1 in Winnipeg, Canada, to oversee the northern part of North America. The demons' names were as follows: Buenos Aires Lunar, Quito Fryer, Monterrey Rumones, and Winnipeg Calvac. Fryer and Rumones shared ownership of Central America. David and his forces were able to wipe out all humanity in the Americas, as Norath didn't threaten them. However, they didn't do this alone. The specter that brought the zombies back from the dead reappeared and gave David advice on how to most efficiently murder people. The specter gave David his name, which was Keener. With Keener's help, David grew. Once David had cleared out humans from the Americas, Keener left him to his business again. But David felt a reinvigorated bloodlust and strong misanthropy. David was king of the Americas, a lord of demons and the satanic undead. Due to this, he didn't think that David was the best name for him anymore. David changed his name to Driver, a name that fit with the demons. Driver had eradicated all human life in the Americas, but he wasn't satisfied. His bloodlust was unmanageable. To in part please his hunger for death, he set upon Rumones under nightfall. Rumones saw Driver as he approached and didn't fear for his life in the slightest. He knew that Driver was his friend and on his side, so the thought never crossed his mind that Driver would want to hurt him. Rumones said to Driver, "What are you doing out this late? I know you normally just soak in your base all night." Driver replied, "I have something I must do. I'm sorry." Rumones inquired as to what Driver meant, a puzzled grin across his face. Driver didn't answer, but as he walked up to Rumones, he pulled a very long knife. Now this scared Rumones. He knew of Driver's tendency to kill and didn't like this at all. Rumones asked once again what Driver meant, this time with fear creeping into his voice. And as tears rolled down Driver's face, he spoke the words, "My bloodlust must be quenched. I'm sorry, my friend." And with that, he stabbed the knife into Rumones' throat. Rumones fell to the ground and gasped and choked as blood began to collect on the pavement around him. Rumones looked at Driver with a chilling fear gripping his face. Rumones attempted to cry out for help, but Driver's knife had mutilated his throat too badly to let screams be made. Driver stood above the dying body of his fallen comrade with confusion. Enough time had passed that Rumones should be dead by now. Driver waited for a bit more time. This time then turned into a lot more time. Driver didn't understand what was going on. He decided that the damage he had inflicted upon Rumones would not suffice, and he fell to his knees. He brought the knife above his head and repeatedly thrusted it into Rumones' chest. A raspy gasp for air drew into Rumones' pierced lungs with every new stab. Rumones raised a trembling hand to try to stop Driver's assault, but it was no use. Driver stabbed him in the palm of his hand and then continued to stab him across the chest and stomach. Blood seeped from the wounds and splashed onto Driver's clothes and face, staining everything on him a deep crimson. Driver stopped stabbing Rumones and stood to inspect the corpse, except it wasn't a corpse. Rumones still had life in his eyes and was still breathing. Driver shrieked with anger. He didn't understand why he couldn't kill Rumones. He didn't even want to do it to fill his hunger for death anymore. He just wanted to put his friend out of his misery. Then a voice appeared in Driver's mind. It hissed the words, "Only a demon can kill a demon and you're still a human. Let me." With that, a shadowy figure leaped out of David's body and set itself upon Rumonis. When the shadow retreated, all that was left of Rumonis was a pile of charred bones. As the shadow turned to face Driver, it became recognizable as Keener. Driver angrily demanded to know what was going on, and Keener decidedly said nothing. Driver continued to request information, even threatening death to Keener. As Keener spoke, he said, "We both know that you can't kill me, no matter what you call yourself. Driver, you'll always truly be David, a human." With this, Driver ran at Keener, and as his fist connected with Keener's ghostly face, Keener simply disappeared. Driver's rage exploded, and fire escaped from his mouth as he screamed to the sky. When the sun rose the next morning, the other demons found Rumonis' remains. They knew that Driver was the culprit, as who else would it be? Norath still hadn't made his way to the Americas, so it had to be Driver. They created a revenge plan. As Driver slept, they attacked him. They bound him in ropes and tied a bag over his head. They made sure that he couldn't get loose. Kalvik took Driver onto a ship and set sail for Norway. When Kalvik arrived, he made the journey to Lillehammer, the place at which Norath's central force was located. Kalvik made his intentions known to just drop Driver off and leave. The zombies didn't let this happen. When Norath returned to Lillehammer, he was greeted with Driver and Kalvik bound in ropes. He promptly executed Kalvik with a blade to the forehead. But Driver interested him greatly. He saw within Driver a great evil, one beyond the bounds of a mere human. He also saw that the evil was being barely balanced out by a power of light. Both of these entities seemed sovereign to David, who was still somewhere within Driver. The being that was Driver seemed to be a composite of all three. Although David was the greatest part, this greatly interested Norath. Norath could see potential for Driver if he could just isolate the darkness within him. Norath decided to consult Satan. Norath descended to hell, and when he returned, he had an internal spell to use. He breathed the words, "Black spell of destruction. I incite your use. Demkuna Travi Sheb Niggerupper, Dafas." And with that, Driver was separated from the evil entity. The entity was set on destroying the world as it stood and covering it in darkness. It spoke, "I'm Keener. Kneel before me now or face your death. I have long been bound by a sense of light and reason, a slight respect for life. Well, no longer. Now I'm free of the oppressive light. I can destroy this mortal plane." He then ascended into the sky, and as he touched the clouds, the world grew dark with the black of nightfall. Keener stole the day and plunged the entire earth into darkness. Keener left. The way he went, neither Norath nor Driver knew. Then Driver began to spasm and took on a new face. It was the face of Caden, a friend of David's in his last life. He said, "Norath, untie me. We have much to discuss." Norath complied, and then Caden left the body of Driver. As
Wait, what happened? Wait, what happened? I don't know. Then David began to spasm. I'm tired. So Duvador is like the compilation of all three of us. All right.
David was then the last part left of Driver. He decided to return to the name David. Caden turned to David and said, "To give some semblance of an explanation, I'm part of an immortal being. I, in balance with the dark entity that just escaped this place, made up Caden. At this point, I'm decidedly just to be referred to as Caden. Let the dark being be called Caden. Caden and I were placed into the same entity to balance each other. I respected the importance of life and light. Caden sought to destroy all life and let darkness reign over earth. He and I balanced each other out. David, we met you in your last life as Caden. We appeared to you as a filthy, disgusting homeless man who was in desperate need of food and help. Caden is now free, and he will destroy the last bastion of humanity if he is not stopped." Norath thought this to be a good thing. He didn't care who killed the last humans, he just wanted them dead. David, on the other hand, wanted to protect the people. Now that Keener had left him, his bloodlust had left him too. He didn't want to erase humanity. He decided that Norath would be no help, but he still needed Norath's forces to defeat Keener. He communicated this to Caden, and they formed a plan to murder Norath. One night, as Norath planned for an attack on the Americas, Caden and David, the old murderous team, reunited, slinked into his lair. They brought large knives with them to dispatch Norath, which they concealed in their shoes. As they entered, Norath looked rather nervous. Sweat gathered on his skin and his eyes looked frenzied. Throughout the whole night of planning, he was very absent. His thoughts seemed entirely elsewhere. Sometime in the night, he said that he had to go to his bedroom to get something. However, he didn't go the correct way. Either Norath still didn't know the layout of his lair, or he was planning something. Caden silently followed him, and as he watched, Norath grabbed a knife. He assumed that it was to kill one or both of them. Caden didn't waste any time to begin the killing, although he knew it would be messier than intended. As Norath carefully handled the knife, Caden rushed in behind him and began to stab him in his back. Caden ripped into Norath brutally, puncturing organs and slicing bones. David heard the commotion and entered the room, knife in hand. As David joined in the fray, Caden was momentarily stunned. He didn't want to hurt David and needed to situate himself in order to only stab Norath. Norath took this brief pause as an opportunity. Not an opportunity to murder David, as he had intended, but an opportunity to drop his knife and run. Norath made a break for the door in order to escape. Caden was surprised and simply stared in shock, but David was not having this. David wouldn't let Norath escape, because if he did, David and Caden would most definitely be killed. David chased Norath through the house, stabbing him in the back and shoulders as he tried to escape. As Norath reached a flight of stairs, David pushed him from behind, and he fell onto a landing. David descended upon Norath like death itself, savagely ripping into Norath's quaking body. Norath rolled David off of him and quietly breathed the words, "Stop, please, it's enough." As David stared into Norath's pained eyes, David felt mercy for him. David would stop stabbing him and just let him die. But then Norath leapt at David. Norath dug his claws into David's chest and slowly began to slide them down as David screamed with pain. Just as Norath was about to reach David's stomach and begin to damage vital organs, Caden appeared from upstairs and fell onto Norath. As Norath fell off of David, Caden stabbed him once in the forehead, finishing him quickly. Caden stood, still holding Norath's body up. Norath's eyes turned back in his head and a slight moan could be heard as the last bit of air left Norath's lungs. Caden let his body fall down the rest of the stairs, and as he looked at David, they silently agreed to deal with it in the morning. As they woke and looked down at Norath's broken form, they simply decided to leave it. Anything they did would be useless, and they felt it was appropriate to let him rot where he fell. He lived and died in battle, and it would make sense for him to find his place of eternal rest where he had lost his final fight. Since Caden had been the one to kill Norath, Caden gained ownership of his armies. The threat of Norath had been eradicated, but Keener still roamed the earth, intending to destroy Old Villador. David and Caden gathered all their forces from across Earth and collected before Old Villador. The four leaders of the forces of the dead, now helping the living, stood before the grand gates of the last city of humanity. David, Caden, Lunir, and Freyr knocked on the gates and were greeted by the ruler of Old Villador, a man by the name of Scott Ethan. Scott saw them approach and ordered his armies to take up their weapons. But when David explained the situation, Scott let his armies join the army of the dead. Survivors stood with sinners as brothers in arms, ready to fight and die for the preservation of humanity. They waited for Keener's attack. As the ranks grew restless, a dark cloud began to rise over the horizon. As the scourge became more visible, the warriors could see that there were many individuals in them. So, as they got closer, they were identifiable. Keener had descended to hell and risen an army of the demons that Norath had killed. The humans and zombies panicked, knowing that only demons can kill demons. The only demons remaining on their side were Ludnir and Freyr. David, Caden, and Scott ordered the soldiers to simply mortally wound the demons. Ludnir and Freyr were to then finish off the helpless demons. As Keener and his demons landed, the two armies stared at each other. Neither moved to attack yet. David, Caden, and Scott stood before Keener, neither party saying a word. Then Keener growled out the phrase, "Demonic warriors, it is time. Decimate every last human, living and dead until the scourge of humanity has been cleansed from the earth." With that, he grabbed Scott by the throat and took flight. People shot at Keener, but they all missed. As demons rushed forward to kill all the humans, Keener dropped Scott. Scott fell from the sky, falling under the rocks on the ground. He practically exploded on impact. His body was endlessly trampled as demons rushed at the army of humans. The humans ran forward too, each side prepared to die for a cause greater than themselves. David and Caden ran back into the ranks of humans, as they were too important to be lost in the first moments of the battle. Demon claws and human blades clashed as the first and bravest soldiers reached Keener's armies. Demons were mutilated and people were killed. As the battle raged on, Keener descended upon the ranks of the humans, pulling people into his flaming shadows and leaving behind only bones. Ludnir and Freyr roamed across the battlefield, ending the lives of every wounded demon they could find. The battle raged mercilessly on without an end in sight. The bodies of humans piled up and blood soaked through the ground, staining the infernal dirt a reddish-brown color. The soldiers that died after leading a life of evil were reanimated, many of whom gave their lives twice for the good of humanity. There remained only about 25 demons, but the numbers of humans dwindled quickly. The remaining humans learned how to better mutilate demons, and Ludnir and Freyr set out to kill demons on their own. David and Caden stood on the walls of Old Villador, watching the carnage unfold, and they
Why don't I
watched
have
in
a
horror as
sniper?
Ludnir
Why don't I have a
fell,
sniper
one of the
rifle
only
or
2
something?
demons that had died in combat. As Ludnir tore into a demon laying on the ground, a demon that had been previously wounded rose behind him. Ludnir
Oh,
didn't
shit.
hear this, and the demon crept up behind him. The demon sliced Ludnir's head cleanly off with a slash from a spike on its tail. Ludnir's head rolled across the ground, trailing a thin stream of blood behind it. At this point, 6 demons remained fighting for Keenan, and the ranks of the deceased god had been greatly diminished.
Shit.
Only about a fourth of the soldiers that began to fight remaining alive. And Keener still swept down from the skies to end the existence of even more humans in the fight. The fight erupted into an even greater degree of chaos as the last few demons on Keener's side fell. Only 2 remained when the hope of humanity died. Freyr threw himself at one of the demons and began to rip out his chest and stomach with his claws, spraying blood and gore across himself, as the other demon grabbed him and dragged him backwards. Keener fell upon Freyr as he squirmed and quickly put the palm of his hand to Freyr's face. Smoke rose and flesh sizzled as Keener's flaming hand scorched Freyr's life away. Freyr screamed with agony as the last seconds of his life evaporated in a blaze of heat. When Keener took his hand away from Freyr's face, all that remained was a charred skull. As the smoke whisked silently into nothing, so too did the future of an earth with humans. All the demons were dead except one, and this demon and Keener began to mercilessly steam all the humans that still stood to fight. Watching this, David was overwhelmed with rage and bloodlust. But this bloodlust wasn't general. This wasn't fueled by misanthropy. No, this was fueled by his inclination to protect the humans. He rushed onto the battlefield. When he reached the deserted body of Ludnir, he pulled out a knife. He hacked through Ludnir's hand and pulled out one of his claws. As Keener and his demon tore through soldiers, David snuck up behind them. David thrust the claw into the back of the demon's head, killing him instantly. Only a demon can kill a demon, but David figured that part of a demon would suffice. Keener looked at the body of his fallen comrade with rage. David ran away as Keener's fury exploded. A beam of pure burning darkness was fired into the battlefield, disintegrating the majority of the remaining soldiers. Keener then fired concentrated blasts of Vanderblack flames at the last living soldiers. On the scorched and bloody battlefield, only David and Keener remained alive. All the demons, zombies, and human soldiers had been killed in the skirmish. Keener began to flow towards David as he ran away. Keener sought to completely end the fight so that he could enter Old Villador and eradicate humanity. Just as Keener got in a close enough proximity to grab David, Caden leapt at him. Caden's human body burned away, falling to ashes on the battlefield ground, and an entity of pure light tackled Keener. They grappled on the ground, exchanging punches and swipes and rolling across the destroyed bodies of the soldiers that had fallen in battle. Eventually, they each held each other by the throat, and as the squeeze, the colors began to bleed together. Black began to bleed into Caden, and white began to bleed into Keener. Eventually, they were both the same entity, a swirling storm of light and shadow. As the lines began to blur between the air and the entity, a silence consumed all the earth. All sound that existed was for a brief moment eradicated. Then the entity exploded in a brilliant burst of light and darkness. The darkness exploded upwards, racing off into the sky and out into space. The light was blown into the ground, sweeping across the battlefield. The light seemed to carry with it life. As it washed over the bodies of fallen soldiers, their skin became once again flesh with the tint of blood. Life returned to their eyes and their lungs dashed with air. They lived once more. The zombies that had died in the battle were also covered in the light. They rose in their human forms, sinners no longer. The light that had exploded from the destruction of Caden had erased their evil. As life thrives once again on earth, and those who wanted it erased rested in death, David breathed with relief. He had saved humanity. He walked through the gates of Old Villador a hero rather than the scourge of humanity. His plague of evisceration stood in opposition to life no longer. As he walked among the frightened citizens and those who had not had the strength to fight for Old Villador, he recognized a familiar face. Pomni, the love of his past 2 lives. She had survived all of this. He walked over to her and wrapped her tightly in an embrace that he had longed for millennia. She reciprocated, having fallen once again for him after seeing him bravely fight for humanity. He breathed into her ear the words, "I've waited so long for you. I'll never let you go again." She sighed heavily. She knew what he had done and still accepted him. They walked up onto the walls of Old Villador and looked out across the field of soldiers who had been reanimated and zombies living once more. Pomni laid her head on David's shoulder, and David laid his head on top of hers. After so much time in torment, David finally stood once more with Pomni, hand in hand until mortality would one day part them.
Alright, this is good. I gave him like a baseline of the script. He kind of like went off on his own thing. It's so good. Still pretty good. This kind of does have some complications that could be smoothed out for the next book. Because I still want the zombies to be around, to be honest. I'm going to give you some insight on that. So basically, what I wanted to happen in the final fight scene is that I wanted David to tackle Villador, and then him see Pomni. And then he was like, oh damn, never mind, wait, what the hell is happening? And then like since Cadener was already in him, and Caden was already in him, I don't know, he could do something like that before I don't fucking know. But, and then after that, like, he would have like a inner fight sequence in which like he battled Cadener, tried to purge him out of his mind. I kind of really like that, I like that idea. I'm a bit disappointed that it didn't really come up with, that really didn't really, work, but no, it's not the end of the world. I could always just repurpose it in, like, next book, maybe, maybe the book after that, maybe the book after that. Alright, well, anywho, thank you for watching. This is the first video that is in horizontal mode. I wanted to say thank you very much. Appreciate you watching this, feeling our desire to create this. In years to come, we might just animate this. This was awesome. It really was awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Korvurrum. Remember, 100 likes on any of my videos? Not even 100. If each video can accumulate 100 likes, like together, like say one gets 25, one gets 25, one gets 50, that equals 100 to me. If we get 100 cumulative likes on each on the videos that can accumulate to 100, I'll believe that out. I will reveal Korvurrum's name. Alright? Hopefully I did not forget to bleep that out. But it wouldn't really matter anyway, because he doesn't really even watch these videos, so. Well, have a good day. Oh, and if you have work to do, you better do that shit, alright? Do your work, fucker. Later, bitches. Alright. Alright, never mind. Later, bitches.